Welcome to another flavor of fun episode. Today I welcome you to join me as we take a historical journey detailing the explorations and settlements of the Amazon jungle. The Amazon jungle, also known as the Amazon rainforest or Amazonia, is a moist broadleaf tropical rainforest in the Amazon biome that covers most of the Amazon basin of South America. This basin encompasses 7 million square kilometers, of which 5,500,000 square kilometers are covered by the rainforest. This region includes territory belonging to 9 nations and 3,344 formally acknowledged indigenous territories. The majority of the forest is contained within Brazil, with 60% of the rainforest, followed by Peru with 13%, Colombia with 10%, and with minor amounts in Bolivia, Ecuador, French Guiana, Guyana, Suriname, and Venezuela. 4 nations have Amazonas as the name of one of their first-level administrative regions, and France uses the name Guiana Amazonian Park for its rainforest-protected area. The Amazon represents over half of the planet's remaining rainforests, and comprises the largest and most biodiverse tract of tropical rainforest in the world, with an estimated 390 billion individual trees divided into 16,000 species. More than 30 million people of 350 different ethnic groups live in the Amazon, which are subdivided into 9 different national political systems and 3,344 formally acknowledged indigenous territories. Indigenous peoples make up 9% of the total population, with 60 of the groups remaining largely isolated. Explorations. The Gold Seekers. Vicente Yanez Pinzone. In 1500, the Spanish navigator, explorer, and conquistador Vicente Yanez Pinzone became the first documented European to sail up the Amazon River. He had arrived on the coast of Brazil the year before, and upon sighting the huge mouth of the Amazon, he set out to see what lay upstream. He made it about 50 miles from the sea, becoming the first foreigner that we know of to make this journey up the mighty river, albeit only for a short distance. He named the river the Rio Santa Maria de la Mar Dulce, River of Saint Mary of the Sweet Sea, the Sweet Sea being a reference to the huge body of fresh water found at the river's mouth. Francisco de Orelana. Francisco de Orelana was a Spanish explorer born in Trujillo in about 1490. He was the first person to navigate the entire Amazon River and was also the founder of the city of Guayaquil in Ecuador. Initially, Orellana joined Francisco Pizarro's army in Peru in 1533, where he fought against Diego del Almagro. This was one of many civil wars amongst conquistadors that tore the region apart. The pair developed a close relationship, and in 1541, Orellana was ordered on an expedition led by Francisco's half-brother Gonzalo Pizarro. Starting in Quito, the purpose of the expedition was to find the legendary El Dorado, a city in the east, which supposedly boasted an abundance of gold and silver. No such city, however, was found, and in sharp contrast to the somewhat celebrated voyage they were expecting, they were attacked by angry natives, riddled by a variety of diseases, and starving. More than half of the expedition was wiped out within the first few months of the expedition. To make matters worse, Orellana, the lieutenant of the expedition, and a handful of some 50 men became separated. Pizarro returned to Quito, but Orellana and his small group continued to travel downriver. This led to the entire exploration of the Amazon River, originally called the Rio de Orellana. The group made it all the way to the Spanish-held island of Cubagua off the coast of Venezuela, and having crossed the whole continent, Orellana decided to return to Spain. Upon arrival, Orellana impressed the Spanish courts and fueled rumors in the belief of the Amazons, a terrifying race of warrior women who inhabited the jungle. He captivated the Spanish people, and around 9 months later, Orellana obtained a commission to conquer the regions he had discovered. However, shortly after his arrival in the Amazon, he died of disease. He will always be remembered as the first person, at least from the Western world, to navigate the length of the Amazon River. Francisco Pizarro. Francisco Pizarro was one of the most notorious Spanish conquistadors, who is commonly known for his part in conquering the Incan Empire. He was born around 1470 and grew up illiterate, having received very little education. In November 1509, he embarked on an expedition from Spain to the New World and sailed to Cartagena, joining the fleet of Martín Fernández de Enciso. Pizarro gradually rose up the ranks and became mayor of Panama City between 1519 and 1523. During his time in Latin and South America, reports of massive riches in Peru began to circulate, and consequently, in two separate attempts in 1524 and 1526, Pizarro tried to conquer the Incan Empire. Native hostilities, terrible weather, and scarcity of supplies all contributed to his failure. Some years later in 1528, Pizarro traveled to northern Peru and he found the natives to possess an abundance of rich metals. This led him to plan a third expedition to conquer the Incas. Initially being denied permission to carry out the expedition by the governor of Panama, Pizarro returned to Spain and appealed to King Charles I. This proved successful, and not only was Pizarro granted authorization for the expedition, but he was also given significant authority over any land he did conquer. He returned to Panama before embarking on his expedition to Peru in 1530. Due to native hostilities on the Peruvian coastline, Pizarro had to move inland and in turn founded the first Spanish settlement in Peru, San Miguel de Pura. Atahualpa, the last Incan emperor, heard of the ordeal and ordered a meeting with Pizarro. Atahualpa condemned Spanish presence and Pizarro consequently attacked the Incan forces in what became known as the Battle of Cajamarca. The Spanish were easy victors, despite being severely outnumbered, and symbolically killed Atahualpa's 12-man honor guard and then took him hostage. Pizarro later executed him in what was a very controversial decision, an action even condemned by the King of Spain. A year later Pizarro invaded Cusco with the help of indigenous troops and wrote back to the King of Spain stating, "This city is the greatest and the finest ever seen in this country or anywhere in the Indies. It is so beautiful and has such fine buildings that it would be remarkable even in Spain." However, Pizarro appreciated that Cusco was not an appropriate capital for the country as it was too far from the coastline, and he, therefore, founded the new capital, Lima. 3 years later in 1541, whilst Pizarro was in Lima, around 20 armed supporters of Diego de Almagro, another conquistador who was killed by Pizarro in the civil war years earlier, stormed his palace and killed him. He was believed to be 62 to 70 years old and his burial site can be seen in the Lima Cathedral. However, this shrine is the subject of much controversy, as many Peruvians regard Pizarro in a negative light for destroying Peru's ancestral Incan culture. The brave botanists. Alexander von Humboldt. Alexander von Humboldt was a Prussian geographer, naturalist, and explorer. Between 1799 and 1804, Humboldt traveled extensively through Latin and South America with his good friend, doctor, and botanist Aimé Bonpland. The pair collected a vast variety of flora and fauna and also made some significant discoveries. While studying electrical currents, they discovered the first animal to actually produce electricity, the electric eel, and whilst completing the extensive mapping of South America, Humboldt was the first person to suggest that continent borders were once connected, South America and Africa most notably. Humboldt also discovered new animals previously unknown to science such as the Wakari monkey. He was the first person to recognize the need to conserve the cinchona plant, which is used to cure malaria, and he was the first person to discover the importance of guano, dried droppings from birds, which makes a great fertilizer. The pair were also the first people to discover the Casquiari Canal that links the Rio Negro and the Orinoco River. Their adventures and discoveries were so extensive that it was all published in a gigantic set of volumes over a 21-year period. These books hugely influenced Charles Darwin, and he always claimed to be a huge admirer of Humboldt. Humboldt died at the age of 90 in Germany. Henry Walter Bates. Henry Walter Bates was an English naturalist and explorer born in 1825. Bates is best known for his voyage into the Amazon and his well-known book, The Naturalist on the River Amazons. His journey began in 1848 when he traveled along with Alfred Russel Wallace to the Amazon to collect animals and study them. For their first year, they lived in a villa near the city of Belém collecting birds and insects. After a year of working together, the pair split up to focus on different areas of the Amazon. Some 11 years later, Bates finally returned to England, and by this time he had gathered a sufficient quantity of animals that would occupy his time. It is reported that he sent back some 14,712 new species of animals, mainly insects, of which around 8,000 were completely new to science. After returning to London, Bates was appointed as Assistant Secretary to the Royal Geographical Survey, and instead of returning to the Amazon, he was stuck in an office for the rest of his life. The stress caused by the job is a possible linking factor to his death by bronchitis in 1892. Much of his work can now be seen in the Natural History Museum in London. Interestingly, Bates mentioned that his worst experience in the Amazon was not with a dangerous animal or fighting a tropical disease, but from the lack of news and information from the outside world. Although an animal lover and true rainforest enthusiast, he stated in his book The Naturalist on the River Amazons that he was obliged, at last, to come to the conclusion that the contemplation of nature alone is not sufficient to fill the human heart and mind. The thrill and legend seekers. Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt is probably the most famous explorer to investigate the Amazon, having been President of the USA between 1901 and 1909. Between 1913 to 1914, Roosevelt, along with Candido Rondo and a small expedition, was to be the first to travel the 1,000 miles long River of Doubt in the Brazilian Amazon. The trip was financed by the American Museum of Natural History, with the pair promising to bring back a vast variety of new animal species. The expedition is described in Roosevelt's very popular book, Through the Brazilian Wilderness. Problems arose for Roosevelt very early into the trip. During the trip downriver, he suffered a leg injury that became infected and consequently gave him tropical fever, closely mirroring malaria he contracted 15 years prior in Cuba. Furthermore, the bullet that had not been removed from his chest just months earlier from an attempted assassination aggravated the infection. By this point, only 6 weeks into the expedition, he was finding it very difficult to walk, suffering from chest and leg pains and fighting a very high fever. He, therefore, had to be tended to day and night by the group's physician as well as his son. This dramatically slowed down the expedition. During the journey, Roosevelt lost some 50 pounds, and upon his return to the States, his friends and family were shocked at the consequences. Roosevelt wrote to a friend that the expedition had cut short his life by 10 years in somewhat of a proleptic state, as he died some 5 years later. For the remaining few years of his life after his return, he required severe surgery on his leg, and malaria continued to plague him. Roosevelt was immediately questioned on the truth of his claims that he indeed explored and navigated the entire 1,000-kilometer-long river, yet when he recovered, he defended himself in a convention with the National Geographic Society and proved he had indeed completed the adventure. Percy Harrison Fawcett. Percy Harrison Fawcett was a British artillery officer, archaeologist, and explorer. After being released from the army, he embarked on several trips to the Amazon River between 1906 and 1925. He is believed to have had a good relationship with the indigenous natives, as he often brought gifts and held a very polite and courteous manner. Fawcett was known to make some rather outlandish claims about native animals he encountered that were completely unknown to zoology. This includes seeing a huge anaconda, a small cat-like dog, and a giant apazorca spider that poisoned locals. The two-nosed dog he claimed to have seen, however, is proven to exist, although very rare, and the species is commonly known as the double-nosed Andean tiger hound. Fawcett embarked on his final trip in 1925 accompanied by his eldest son and his friend. Having studied many ancient legends, Fawcett truly believed that there was a lost ancient city somewhere in the Mato Grosso region in Brazil and consequently wanted to be the first to discover it. Fawcett decided to travel very light, and apart from a few basic supplies, they were to live off the jungle. Furthermore, his son and his son's friend were to be his only travel companions, so they would be less noticeable. Native tribesmen were often hostile to explorers, and many had never seen a white man before. The last known contact with the trio was in May 1925, when Fawcett sent a letter to his wife stating they were about to enter the uncharted territories of the Amazon. They were never seen or heard from again. Many theories suggest that they were murdered by local tribesmen, but it is also believed that they might have died from the disease in the jungle. It is estimated that some 100 men have since died trying to locate Fawcett's remains. The modern-day eco-explorers. Sidney Posuelo. Sidney Posuelo is an explorer and social activist. He is an expert in isolated tribes of the Amazon and has won numerous awards. He started his career by helping the Villas-Boas brothers in their work with indigenous people in the Brazilian Amazon before becoming director of the Department of Unknown Tribes at the FUNAI until 2006. Posuelo has led many expeditions to find uncontacted tribes to protect them from common threats including deforestation, drug trafficking, and violence, and disease. He is famously known for restoring peace with Carubo Indians who had previously killed FUNAI officials. Although Posuelo has led many successful campaigns, there have been recorded instances of him being shot by a bow and arrow. Settlements. It was always believed that before Spanish invaders conquered South America, sparse groups of nomadic people clustered around the Amazon River, leaving the surrounding rainforest pristine and untouched. However, new research suggests a very different story, an Amazonian region peppered with rainforest villages, ceremonial earthworks, and a much larger population than previously thought. Research published in the journal Nature Communications challenges a common perception of the pre-Columbian Amazon rainforest as sparsely populated. That perception has endured despite 16th-century accounts of large, interconnected villages that go against modern assumptions. Much of the region is unexplored and covered in dense forest, so it has been inaccessible to archaeologists until recent times. The team used satellite imagery to try to identify ancient geoglyphs, earthworks likely used for ceremonies, in previously unexplored parts of the Brazilian state of Mato Grosso. Armed with the coordinates of likely geoglyphs, a team headed to the field, sometimes literally, since large swaths of land in the region are used for agriculture and each of the 24 targets they visited were the real deal in discovering ancient civilizations. At one site, the team located ceramics and charcoal suggesting a village that dated to about 1410 AD. Back in the office, they used their findings to predict where other sites might be located, creating a computer model that took everything from elevation to soil pH to precipitation into account. It showed that people would likely have built geoglyphs in high elevation areas with big variations in seasons and temperatures. The model also showed that people wouldn't necessarily have built close to rivers, an idea which runs counter to modern assumptions. It revealed that there are likely 1,300 geoglyphs and villages in a 154,000 square mile swath of southern Amazonia, 2/3 of which haven't been found yet. The computer model also predicted population densities that were much larger than expected. The team now thinks that between 500,000 and 1 million people once lived in just 7% of the Amazon basin. That flies in the face of previous estimates that only about 2 million people lived in the entire Amazon basin. The distribution of the potential sites suggests an interconnected, advanced series of fortified villages spanning over 1,100 miles that flourished between 1200 and 1500 AD. It would seem that over time, these peoples died out after the European conquest of the region. Disease and genocide wiped out entire villages, and many others abandoned agriculture altogether as they would have needed to be constantly on the move. However, the traces they left behind mean there's still more to learn about their now vanished civilization. Between 1980 and 2000, urban population in Brazil's legal Amazon almost tripled, from 4.7 million, 45% of the region's population, to 13.7 million, 69%. This trend was particularly marked around major urban centers, duty-free zones, Manaus and Macapa, and areas where wood processing and mining take place. In the process, both forests and people have greatly suffered. For the Amazon rainforest, roads are very often bad news. In the Brazilian Amazon rainforest, about 80% of the deforested areas are within 30 kilometers of official roads. In addition to that, approximately 80% of urban centers, agrarian reform settlements and zones around deforestation hotspots are located within 70 kilometers of such roads. The Trans-Amazonian Highway cuts through interior forest, well off the floodplain and hence in an infertile area. In addition to fertilizer, which is expensive, high rainfall in the area often leads to erosion, while damaged roads cut off supplies and made it difficult to send the land's products to the cities. A poor consolation is that these small producers typically own their land, which distinguishes them from the 11 million landless peasants in Brazil. According to a resettlement effort undertaken in Brazil, colonists settling on the frontier of the Amazon rainforest would receive a lot just over 1 square kilometer in size, 6 months' salary, and agricultural loans, which entitled them to settle along the highway and cut the surrounding rainforest to grow crops. 5 million cattle were also brought into the area, a trend repeated elsewhere. Many problems, including diseases brought by the people, increased deforestation. Originally, the government planned to plant rice, but this required fertilizer, herbicide, and insecticide. Agricultural pests appeared. After people had settled, malaria spread, brought by migrants from the northern areas. Soon, people were also afflicted with gastrointestinal diseases because of poor sanitary conditions. The cost to Brazil for this resettlement operation has been $500 million, and the cost to the rainforests are inestimable.